Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself stuck in a tough situation and thought, surely this cannot be right? Maybe it was dealing with an unfair teacher, or maybe you were in a home where peace was hard to find. Now, imagine being a Christian in the first century and a slave. Would you think, surely God must want me free? It is a serious question, and it deserves a careful, prayerful answer. So let's walk through this together, thoughtfully and patiently. When Paul wrote letters to Christians who were slaves and to those who were masters, Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 to 9, Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 24, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 to 3, and Titus chapter 2, verses 9 to 10. He did not call for a revolution. He did not organize a rebellion or an uprising. Instead, he gave them simple, powerful instructions about how to live faithfully right where they were. Strange, isn't it? Wouldn't you expect Paul to say, break your chains and run to freedom? But he did not. He told slaves to serve as unto the Lord, and masters to treat their slaves justly, knowing they too had a master in heaven. Paul even sent a runaway slave, Onesimus, back to his Christian master Philemon, as we see in Philemon chapter 1, verses 10 through 19. Think about that for a second. Would Paul, an apostle of Christ, ever encourage someone to return to a sinful relationship? Absolutely not. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 to 18, Paul commands believers to separate themselves from all wickedness. Yet in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 20 to 24, he advises slaves to remain in their condition unless they can lawfully obtain freedom, and even then they are to use it rather to glorify God. If slavery itself were inherently sinful, Paul would have condemned it plainly and called Christians to abandon it immediately. Instead, he saw slavery as one of the painful realities of a fallen world, a condition that, while undesirable, was not necessarily sinful in itself. Today, when we hear the word slavery, our minds quickly picture chains, cruelty, and injustice, and rightly so, considering the terrible abuses that have happened throughout history. But let's slow down and think like Paul did. In his time, slavery was woven deeply into every part of society. It was not simply about race or cruelty. It was often about economics, survival, and societal roles. If all forms of slavery were automatically sinful, Paul would have condemned the institution itself without hesitation. But he didn't. Instead, he gave guidance on how both slaves and masters could live righteously within that system. This tells us something profound. It was not the existence of slavery that was evil, but the abuses, mistreatments, and injustices that often came along with it. Culture often shapes how we act and how we are perceived. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 to 16, where he discusses women wearing veils in Corinth. In that culture, wearing a veil showed a woman's respect for her husband and acknowledged God's design for authority. If a woman took off her veil, it signaled rebellion against God's order. Thus, Paul urged women to honor the custom, not because the veil itself had magic power, but because refusing to wear it would send the wrong message about God's truth. Customs matter when they support righteousness and order. They don't matter when they lead away from it. The same logic applies to slavery. Just because something is common does not mean it is good, but neither does it mean that it is automatically evil. Abuse of slaves was wrong. Kind and fair treatment within the relationship was not. The Greek word Paul uses for slave is doulos, meaning someone bound to another's will, someone who doesn't belong fully to themselves. Even today we see versions of this. Prisoners in jail cannot simply walk out. Soldiers in the army must obey orders, even when they are tired or scared. Children, under God's design, are to obey their parents. In each case, the person's freedom is limited for a greater purpose. Is it always enjoyable? Well, of course not. Is it always abusive? No. Is it always sinful? Clearly not. Authority, when used rightly and lovingly, is honestly a great blessing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 to 20, Paul says, "You are not your own, you were bought with a price." Every Christian, in a real sense, is a slave to Christ. And honestly, there is no better master. Even Jesus himself took the form of a servant, as Philippians chapter 2, verse 7 tells us. Jesus willingly embraced servanthood, showing humility and obedience, even unto death. If all slavery were evil, then, well, being a Christian would be evil, but we know better. If slavery itself were sinful, then Paul's teachings would be false, and the Holy Spirit who inspired them would have made a mistake. That is impossible. The real problem is not the existence of authority, but the abuse of it. Abusive masters sinned. Faithful masters honored God. Abused slaves suffered. Faithful slaves honored God through their patient endurance. Now, let's be practical. Even if slavery itself is not sinful, has it been good for human society? History shows us the answer: no. Human beings, in their sinful nature, almost always abuse positions of power. Throughout history, slavery has torn apart families, making it difficult for God's plan for family life to flourish. It has forced people into lives and work they never chose for themselves. Slavery has crushed a person's sense of dignity and personal worth, blocked the free exercise of worship and religious conviction, undermined fair and just government, and, honestly, failed as an efficient and just economic system. These failures are why totalitarian governments like communism and Nazism, which enslaved their people, collapsed into misery and oppression. Over time, as the gospel spread through the world, hearts changed. People began to see the damage that slavery caused, not because new political theories were introduced, but because Christ transformed human hearts. Slowly and quietly, love, mercy, and justice grew. There was no need for violent revolutions. No armies needed to march. It was the gentle but unstoppable power of the gospel that made slavery increasingly unthinkable in Christian cultures. Maybe you're asking yourself, if God allowed slavery back then, but we now see its harm, what does that say about God's wisdom? Well, it says something beautiful. It shows us that God meets people where they are, even in broken systems. He plants seeds of change, not through violence and rebellion, but through the transformation of the heart. He works with real people in real cultures, patiently leading them towards his ultimate design of love, justice, and freedom. The gospel does not merely smash evil systems, it melts hearts of stone and gives them life. It renews the mind, it builds new communities where respect, love, and dignity flourish. And that, my friend, is the real hope of Christianity. It is not rooted in political revolutions or worldly philosophies. It is rooted in heart transformation, in becoming joyful, willing servants of the greatest master of all, Jesus Christ. Will you let his love and truth change your heart today? Will you willingly give yourself to the only master who brings true freedom?